Welcome back, everyone. Hope you are refreshed from the break. We have one final segment to go. As mentioned earlier, this segment is on addiction, compulsion, and the church. It will be really interesting to end day one of the conference. We'll be learning from Dr. Winslow and Reverend Timothy Khoo. Please continue to use Slido to post your question and vote on one another's question. Over to you, Dr. Winslow.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here. Let me just get my slides up and shared. Why do my slides do not want to share? Can you all see my slides yet?
Not yet.
Okay. You need to give me permission to share slide.
I believe you have.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Here we go. Well, thank you very much for the privilege of being able to share with you. This is a topic which is on my heart for a long time. And it's basically about compulsions and addictions within the church and within our religious circles. I got into addictions by accident, but sorry. So I'm just going to share with you very quickly some slides, and then the second half I will have Reverend Timothy Khoo to be able to share, and then we will take some questions and answers at the end, or share a little bit at the end of it. So this is what I'm going to share about. Introduction. I thought that it's important to just put some things out there because not everybody understands addictions. Think that it is, some people just think that if you have enough willpower, you can just break any addiction. This is a brain, in case for those who didn't recognize what it is. And here's what I'd like you to do, since we are just off stretching and it's been a long morning. Can you take two fingers on your right hand and put it on your forehead, like so? Two fingers. And one finger on your left hand and put it on your left temple. Now, why this? Well, it's graphic because the part where the reward center in the brain is where there's an intersection of these two lines. Okay, thank you very much. Just to let you know, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, this is the reward center, the bit in purple there. And why is a reward center important? Because through scientific discovery, most addictive processes or compulsive processes go through your reward center. To develop a real addiction, you have to have a reward. You have to feel good, or you must get a buzz, or you must get something that gives you some excitement, or it helps you in some way or other. And that's your reward center. And so there is a chemical basis for a lot of things. Now, I'm not saying that all addictions develop because of chemicals, but that, through processes, and there are things that can make you feel good or shook. And in our Singapore context, we see them all the time. Let's look at this very quickly. Okay, the types of addictions that people get into, besides the heroin, alcohol, meth, and all those substances, we also see gambling, sex, eating, and power. In Singapore, there's also apparently workaholism, but we try not to tell that too much. If not, we will get into trouble with the powers that be. Uh, and these process of behavior addictions are becoming more and more prominent as time goes by. I mean, who does not understand Singapore culture? If you're feeling down, it's time for Penang char kway teow or lamb biryani, or something else on those lines. There's eating, there's also all kinds of other internet behaviors that are used now. A lot of it is gaming in the younger age group, but also other things like just surfing mindlessly and continually doing web searches. Okay, so why compulsion? There's priority is on attachment of value to a behavior and usually associated with some level of dysfunction. The behavior is usually hidden, and here I've hardly ever seen any of my clients or patients or friends come to see me uh, w- saying that I'm here because I have an addiction straight up. Most of the time, they beat around the bush a long time first and then tell you about it. Most often, they tell you that the behavior, I have a friend who has these behaviors. Okay. Mentioned to you earlier on, we all come with inbuilt appetites for food, for sex, for love, for relationship. And it's part of our human nature and our physical and mental makeup. Addictions to form must serve a function or a purpose here. I'll tell you very briefly some of the things that I think are the functions and purposes of them. But I'd also like to just first tell you that they are genetic and environmental protective and predisposing factors to most addictions. Genetic because there's inbuilt if you had a father who's a gambler, yeah, the chances of you developing gambling are pretty high. If you had a mother who is an alcoholic, the chances of you developing that are pretty high. And the same for a lot of mental conditions or mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and stuff like that. But in addition to that, despite having a genetic predisposition, it is the environmental factors, the ways that we grew up. And I listened to Daniel talk about his adverse childhood experiences study, and that's huge in addictions because a lot of people with trauma, and trauma can not only be from actual physical, sexual, or other trauma, but also from neglect or not being ever told that you're loved or things like that. So these are they are protective factors and they're predisposing factors. This is a slide I used 20 years ago, and look at the figures there. At that time, they already asked Singaporeans how many percent have ever had cyber sex. And among all the Asian countries, we were, I think, the top at that time in the year 2001. So, it's just progressed from there as far as I know. This is just to let you know that it is prevalent and present and it's easy to get sucked in. So these are the diagnoses for all addictions, but basically all addictive behaviors have to have some of these things. There's a loss of control. You start off, and nobody starts an addictive or a behavior or a process like drinking or uh, pornography, thinking that, oh, my aim in life is to become an addict or to become an alcoholic. They start and it serves a function to them, and then they continue. And then before long, they realize that they have lost some control, and then they discover that when they want to break that cycle, or every time that they want to break it, there is a continuation, or they continue using the same behavior despite the adverse consequences to their emotions, to their morality, to their spiritual lives. And for some people, it becomes an obsession or a preoccupation. I've seen people who tell me that from the time they wake up in the morning, they're already starting to think about how to, if it is a drug, for example, how to get enough money to get their drug, or if it is uh, going online for pornography, how to hide it so that my wife or kids don't know about it, and all this kind of things. Okay. The presence of all three criteria operationally defines an addiction to any drug or behavior. So, why do men and women who know scripture, intelligent, committed, disciplined, risk everything that is important to them to act out sexually? Well, here's Patrick Kahns, one of the gurus of sexual addictions. He says that there's a huge emotional cost, and didn't even talk about the spiritual cost, but 97% lower self esteem, 96% significant guilt and shame, isolation, loneliness, hopelessness, and despair. Uh, nobody in their right minds would want to do this voluntarily. And this is why you need to look at it that addictive behaviors take on a life of their own, and it actually requires uh, a decision and a will that I'm going to change, and then finding a whole bunch of other assistance from the community that loves you, your family or your friends or your church mates or cell group that helps. Here's the power. I write a little bit about pornography because I think that it is a huge issue. I vaguely remember reading the Focus on the Family rates of pornography within the church, and they don't seem to be any different from that in the community. So it is pretty huge. Sexual addictions involve a process that is progressive. Where it starts is not where it ends. And this is where we find even church leaders and pastors and people who seem to be on the outside fully upright actually progressing in their addictive behaviors. The harm that is done is fundamentally relationship or relational in nature. It is to ourselves, our God, our family, friends, and those that we influence. And I think you've seen within our circles, especially in the US, where the falls from grace are much more played up because it's a lot more political in that situation. But this is why it is so important. And I think that here is one of the difficulties that churches and spiritual communities rarely talk about sexuality, what is acceptable, what's not, what's why, and give people the ability to be real and authentic in their expressions of themselves without a judgment call straight up. Okay, I've just got one more thing because Timothy also asked me to share how do people get well a little bit from sexual addictions. And I'll tell you that basically what happens is that people who come to see me usually are full of guilt and shame, and they want to do the right thing. And most of the time, people only get into treatment or therapy when there is a crisis. Sometimes they make their own crisis because they say, I can't do this. I am acting out against my belief system, against God. And that was very interesting because when I was with IMH, the first 80 patients that we had with sexual addictions or sexual compulsivity, um, a vast number of them were Christians or Muslims or imams or religious folk, people with a spiritual value system. And that also makes sense because it is people who have a value system or who have a conscience who realize that, hey, I may need to do something about this. I may need to get help for myself. I can't live like this. Uh, Very quickly, Timothy asked me yesterday, last night, why do people fall into addictions like sexual compulsions? And I told him there, as far as I understand from my work in addictions, there are three main reasons. The first is uh, people want to feel powerful or strong or good uh, or energetic. And the underlying subtext there would be that there is a lack of self-esteem or feelings good about themselves. Their mood may also be low in that area. And so they do risk-taking behavior. Um, One of the things which I always say that I find great difficulty is doctors who, and there's one yesterday, doctors who do upskirt videos or expose themselves. It does not make sense just purely in the physical sense, but in the risk-taking sense, it is got a clear buzz to your reward center in your brain to make you feel good. The second is the behavior is numbing, where you start to do behaviors like internet pornography and masturbation repeatedly. And because there's pain or there's emotionally unpleasant stuff that you don't want to deal with. And when you go online, it's either seen as a stress reliever or a number. So it numbs your emotions and you feel okay. okay. Some people say that they cannot sleep without going and masturbating first. And the third big reason that I've seen among my clients would be that people who say that real life sucks and what I want is this fantasy world that I'm living in where I am a stud or a king or whatever it is seems so much more lively than the world that I'm actually inhabiting. Okay. Lastly, very quickly before Tim comes on, it is how do people get well? And maybe we will talk a little bit more about this later on. But people get well by being honest and authentic. The key feature of all addictive behaviors or all compulsions is secrecy. The saying is that people are only as sick as their secrets. And if you're not keeping secrets, then you're much less likely to be emotionally, mentally, or spiritually sick. So, learning to be honest, learning to find people that you can be honest with and authentic with, especially in a recovery journey, is important. I always recommend to whether they are in Bible school or whether they're in a cell group or anywhere else, get an accountability buddy. And the accountability buddy generally, but not always, we ask it not to be a family member, but somebody who you trust as a mentor or leader, um, or somebody who has been a brother or sister in your own wellness or spiritual journeys. And the third then is learning that you need to get a power greater than yourself, in our case, Jesus, to surrender to. Because a lot of people say that a lot of people I see coming to addictions try to white knuckle it. That means they say, I won't do it, I won't do it, I won't do it. And unfortunately, in addictive cycles, there is something that says that that which is resisted persists. Your active brain or your conscious brain is constantly saying, no, 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 I don't want to do. But your subconscious brain is saying, oh, yes, that would be a great relief right now, or that would be wonderful to do. And so that which is resisted persists. So, how do you do it? And the way that Christians can do it is learning that, okay, I can't do it. Jesus or my power can do it. So I surrender myself to Him. And so every time the temptation or the urges come, it's learning to turn it over and say, oh dear, here it comes again, the stupid urge. And there's a whole series of things that people can do when it comes, including calling or talking to their sponsor or to their mentor. Okay, I'm going to leave it there.
And Muni, thank you for putting this together where you give the science and Timothy give the life. Yeah, we have some questions that we thought it was good for us to dialogue together. There's a question that asks, are there Christian support group for those who are struggling with porn? And are this training, could the church to run such group? And because since you say porn is such a pandemic in the church, for which I agree because I know the stats and all that. And looking within my own soul, I would be first to say that we're all fallible. Yeah. So coming back, are there Christian support group that that people can learn about and can go to? Over to you, Muni.
I'm not too sure about Christian support groups, but if you think about it, all the 12-step support groups have got a Christian basis to them because they are based on the fact that we have to admit that we have sinned or done something wrong or fallen into addiction. We must accept that there is a power greater than ourselves, and we call him God, who is able to help us out of that. And then we turn our lives as we understand it to that higher power. Uh, in Singapore, when I first started 20 odd years ago, there was maybe 1 year, one group. Now, every single day of the week, there are sex and love addiction groups running. You got to go and search for them online, ask Mr. Google. Uh, the second is um, SAA. There's also an Augustine fellowship. If you go to the US, there are at least 50 different sex and love addiction groups that are running, everything from Overcomers Anonymous or Overcomers Victorious. So you can find Christian groups. And after this pandemic, we find that A lot of my clients and people realize that they can actually just as easily go and join a group in the US or in Britain or anywhere else or in Australia as attend one here. And they have the same level of confidentiality and anonymity generally, if not even more, because you're not known in a foreign country. So yes, the groups are available for the in-person groups. I think Salt Care also helps host one of the groups, the Augustine Fellowship in Novena Square. And there are a few other groups that can be accessed, but I can't give you the information straight off. It's available online.
Uh, what about you, Tim? Do you have any information to share about support group for Christians?
Yeah. Well, sounds very self-serving, but I I run I facilitate a retreat that invites people into a space of shared brokenness. So it might not be pornography addiction, although I've had people come, who obviously has some measure of addiction to pornography. But it's about this space of our brokenness and our honesty around it. So if I may, and all these support groups are valid, right? Which target specific kinds of addictive behaviors, etc. So it's not to in any way make it sound like this is better, but what I found is that sometimes the principle of indirection, of dealing with our brokenness, which leads to addictive behavior, compulsions, etc., is sometimes a way to deal with it. So I have had people, again, as I mentioned, come with all sorts of different kinds of addictions. And so it's not, and I guess this is part of the way I think about it, it's not only looking at what you've done, but what's been done to you. So whether it's trauma or something about your brokenness that has led to an addictive behavior. So in the work that I do with prisoners, and a lot of them are, majority of prisoners have some form of a drug antecedent, right, background. It's not so much to focus on what they did wrong, but what went wrong. Back when they were child abuse, trauma, in an environment where sometimes, the whole house was smoking drugs, etc. And looking at it and unpacking that as well. So I think both there are two ways in which it could be dealt with varying degrees of success, I suppose.
Thanks, Timothy. And just to assure you that you're not self-promoting, because you're doing a lot of good work. And I think that the body of Christ need to know, just like all the other organization that we are showcasing here, is to promote the good work that many of believers are doing out there, so that the church can come together and tap on one another. I know that just like Muni talks about Google, you can Google Fountain Gate. I believe Fountain Gate deal with some addiction issue for women.
Yes.
My church does this program called Rescue, and that's for men struggling with sexual issues as well. You can write to me privately, and we can talk offline. No, I want to tekan you with one question. Yeah, and it's directed to both of you. How do you cope with your sexual urges? So let's start with the doctor.
I think that the main way is through having accountability buddies or friends, or for us supervisors that we can sit and talk to about what's going on. I remember I mentioned earlier on, we are only as sick as our secrets. And so the less secrets that we have, it's one of the things that we do for when I teach other people how to come out of this is get an accountability buddy if this is your vulnerability. Ask him to ask you these 3 or 4 questions every week, ask me whether I've gone online to view pornography, whether I have done anything which is questionable and stuff like that. And I want you to do it every single week, maybe on a Monday or on a Sunday or whatever it is. And I'll answer you honestly. Now, whenever you are tempted or whenever I'm tempted, think of the fact that I'm going to have to honestly answer these questions. It probably stop you straight.
Thanks. I was so glad that you did say I don't have such urges.
No, definitely have urges. In fact, I find that in therapy, I realize that it's the people who seem to say that they don't have any urges and show nothing on the outside who are worse. The ones who come in and tell you, I don't know what to do with my feelings and my emotions. Like, always getting tempted. Those usually turn out better than the others.
Yes, yes. I think that the willingness to admit that we have weaknesses is the first step for recovery and wholeness. Thanks.
If I could,
yes,
if I could jump
correct.
in, just to say that the issues that are being discussed actually is not limited to just men. So there's a question in Slido as well that, you know, women face these struggles as well. So how are there groups, or how can the church better support women that also face addiction challenges? They are also, you know, enticed by pornography and so on. So how can we come alongside to support women? Dr. Winslow?
I think that we have to understand that in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, there are women's groups as well. So when you choose, I mean, very early on, about 20 odd years ago, when I first started doing addictions, I was learning from scratch about how to do it because nobody had actually done a lot of treatments before. And so when we started Sex and Love Addiction groups, it was both genders or both sexes. And within a short period of time, I realized that was probably a bad idea to have sex addicts of both sexes in the same group. Okay, so churches, there are counselors and therapists who deal and work with individuals. I hate to say this, but sometimes churches, or so far those women I've seen with sexual compulsions, a lot of it is driven in some extent or allowed to continue because there are predators within the church as well who make use of vulnerabilities and make use of the fact that uh, some women just want to have somebody to look up to, and they take advantage of that. Um, there is a difference. There's sex and love addict groups because the guys are mainly driven by the hunt or the chase and the sex, and the women are more the love or the relationship. And especially for the women, you find that a lot of them are because of some form of childhood trauma or childhood adverse event within the family that has happened, which has led them down certain paths in terms of their sexuality or acting out. And having to, in all behavior addictions, the first thing is stop the addictive behavior. The second is have a therapist or have a spiritual director or pastor or somebody sit and work with you, those who are trained is better usually, and work through where this hurt and where this pain and there's a lot of places that talk about healing the hurts that bind you or spiritual healing. And we sometimes need that because it is more than just stopping the behavior. It is also acknowledging that I have been hurt by certain things in my past, especially for the women.
For your time this morning. I think we have learned a lot, and we've been very blessed by your sharing as well. I hope that this is just, I hope this will be a beginning for all the participants who are listening in to learn, to begin to come up, to share, to form good friendship, good accountability partners, to build on some of the good advices that you have given to us. Our time has really caught up with us, so we need to move on from this segment. So thank you very much again, Dr. Muni and Timothy, for coming on board to share with us about this very important topic about addiction, all right, and compulsion.